as you know, news is not science, right? It's not a science, so nothing is perfect, nothing is absolutely clear. So it's all based on practical knowledge, what I'm going to tell you in a second. Okay. And here we go. So this is me. Hello, everybody. And I'm glad you only asked 3 questions because we only have half an hour. And we'll delve into it straight away with some financial and economic elements. And I'm insisting on this because I think it's important that everybody keeps that in mind. The situation we are in. News companies are struggling. We know that they're dealing with complete reinvention of their business. All media have to output at least 2 versions of their content nowadays. We have adversary conditions with big hike in production costs. For instance, for newspapers, advertising revenue is shifting more and more towards platforms. By the way, someone told me last week that by 2035, 2/3 of advertising revenue in media will go to platforms. It's just above 50% at the moment. So it's increasing. Situation is difficult. And I'm insisting on this because we have to realize that our bosses, the people who will decide if we have money or not to spend on media literacy, have pressing issues. They have a difficult environment, yet they know, and that's a very interesting point. 10 years ago, it was not the case. Now, I think every publisher, every news media executive knows that media literacy or media education, however you call it, is part of the solution. And they are aware, these people, of certain facts, that they need new customers, their brands are not in the scope of younger audience, there is a distrust in media in the general public. And paradoxically, the media people use most nowadays, social media, is the ones that trust less. Okay, so trust is important. And it's very interesting to think about this for a minute, because people know that having a trustworthy source is important to them. And they know some news sources carry more trust than others. This is a quote by a psychologist. He was interviewed 3 days after the Hamas attack on Israel. And the question that was asked was, how do we speak about these horrible things we've seen and the fake content that's been published online? How do we speak to our kids about this? And what he said is interesting. The important thing is keeping dialogue and trust alive at home. The more your child trusts you, the higher the probability he would come and talk to you about something that disturbs him. I'll give you another survey, another element, and then we'll build on this. Milan Press is a youth publisher in France. They did a big survey 2 years ago about 13 to 17-year-old and the way they deal with news. And the survey showed that parents are the number one source of confirmation of news for them. So what we see is that there is a need for trust, and we have to address young audience by taking in account the family unit, the teachers as well. But we can't do media literacy by only focusing on kids. It doesn't really work. If someone does a fantastic media literacy project at school, they go home and the father comes back from a protest or from a conversation at the bar or with colleagues after a football game and say, well, all journalists are liars anyway. Kids will not argue immediately, completely, and defend press as a principle. People listen to their kids listen to their parents. So we have to take that in account when we build media literacy projects. The only thing that we have for certain is that we have news as a main starting point. And we don't really know what news media means to the public. We have to bear in mind that young people have access to more news than they ever had. They have at the same time, most often unwillingly, relinquished their power to choose their content to algorithm. So there's more news than ever, and people don't choose their news, not as much as they could or as they should. They're bombarded with content that pretends to be news by entertainment and advertisement alike. Amongst all this, they get to see some information sometime. And if you don't pay attention, it looks like everything has the same importance and is interchangeable. So our job is to help young people understand what news is and what it's not, so that, and that's the best definition of media literacy that I know, they have the tools to make educated choices and forge their own opinion. So we have to help them make the difference between news media and platforms so that they understand that they have a choice. Why is news important to them? I think is the key. Is the key because when we talk to them, especially that generation of teenagers now, young teenagers now, there has been a cry, a call for empowerment. And if we challenge their habits, the way they consume news, I usually ask people, how do you get your news, the kids? And they all tell me, oh, newspaper, radio, public. That's nonsense. Everybody I know, all the teenagers around me, young adults, everybody goes to Instagram and TikTok first. And then they check news websites. We adult and we professional might go to news sources first, but the general public is hooked, addicted completely to TikTok, to Instagram, which is not bad. That's how it is at the moment. It might be bad, but that's how it is. And so we have to question their habits because we know it's happening. And so we can ask them, so is that where you get your first news? What is news to you? And how do you choose? And by asking this question and talking about it and trying to find answers together, then they realize they have a power when it comes to news. Which means for us, we have to know the tools and we have to know the philosophy behind the tools and we have to make the connection. What I mean is, if we can explain to them that the whole point, the sole point of this platform is to grab their attention to sell advertisement directly and indirectly, and not to make them better citizens, then they can realize that they are being trapped. But that means we need to know how this platform works. I mean, if you can break the algorithm of TikTok, well done, you're going to be a billionaire. But it's not my point. My point is that we have to be very clear about the way these platforms work so that we can explain the way we work in comparison. And once again, talking to young people, because that's a question that was asked, we have to be positive because it's true. Social media can be a fantastic source of news. It can be amazing. The women's revolution in Iran was not known to the world until we got pictures on Instagram and TikTok. And it's easy for you, media professionals, to explain, well, okay, it's just a picture in Iran. I don't know the guy who took it. Yet, finally, because I can put it in context and I can use my sources and I cross-reference my reports, I can see that it's accurate and it's interesting and it's important. And that's why just a picture can be news in itself. So basically, what I'm saying is we have to help them understand what's happening around them in terms of communication and tools. And they don't know, most of the time, they don't know that Instagram doesn't have journalists because the brands, the news brands, have gone completely. There's no, I mean, I remember the word legacy media, but there's no legacy media anymore. I mean, some people might go into adulthood nowadays without knowing what are the number one newspaper in the country anymore because they don't know the brand, they don't see the newspaper physically, and all their life goes through a screen. So we have to be very humble about all this. What I'm saying now I couldn't have said 10 years ago. They don't know the brand, they don't know the product. We have to educate them and bring very simplistic sometimes so that they understand what we do. And that's my second point. It's all about transparency. Because, and we'll talk about it later on in a conversation mode, but do you really think there's distrust in media or there is a lack of knowledge? Do people really know, especially young people, what medias are? I'm not really sure. I don't have the answer for that, but I think that lack of knowledge is a better definition than distrust. And how do we help with that? But we make sure that they know what we're doing, and we can use the objectives as a classifier. For instance, the objective of news media content is to get you better informed so that you can make educated choices. Advertising, selling your product, platform, grabbing your attention. Okay. I know I've said that before, but it's very important to be extremely clear. Yet you will get the question once every other encounter with young people. Yeah, but journalists, they have an agenda. Do they have an agenda? I'm not really sure. I don't think they have an agenda. They might have an opinion, but they also have techniques. They also have regulations. They also have a financial structure that enables them and enables them to do things. All this is completely unknown to the general public, the way we work, the regulation that we have to put in place. In France, there's one leading criteria, which is good faith. Okay, good faith. You have to report and publish in good faith. I'll give you one example of something that happened recently this year in France. And Sophie and I worked for that company a long time ago. Bloomberg News, financial news company, publishes the earnings of a listed company that manages highways. They get the earnings, yearly earnings, they put it on the terminal, goes out, stock market, the share goes down 10% immediately because the figures are terrible. And they Bloomberg News realized that actually it's a fake report they were sent. Malpractice. Someone sent them a fake report. They take it away after 10 minutes. And they've just been sentenced by the highest court in France to pay 5 million euros in fine because they didn't act in good faith. They didn't do what they had to do. They didn't do the due diligence. They didn't follow the rules. They didn't follow the legality of news business. Nobody talks about this when we do media literacy, and it's at the heart of what we do. We are craftsmen and women. We have techniques. We just don't decide to speak about what we want to speak about because we feel like it. All this we need to be transparent about. I show you one example. That's a leading newspaper in France in circulation. It's 700,000 copies a day. And they had a price hike not so long ago. So €1.20 to €1.30 at the bottom. And they explained the breakdown of the price. So this is something I use, okay? Because we usually hear, and that's why I was talking about lack of knowledge instead of distrust. French newspapers have subsidies from the state, therefore they are the voice of the government. They will never criticize Macron. This newspaper said, okay, this is the subsidies we have. So that's in yellow. We have 0.02 cents per newspaper that comes from public subsidies. And this we use to bring the cost down to 1.30 for you to buy because it cost us 1.63 to make. And the 31 cents that helps us do that as well come from advertising. I mean, it's flawless logic. We can explain these kind of things. So transparency, nowadays, it might be different in 5 years, but now we have to explain all these things when we talk about our industry and the way we do it. I use, and so the question arises usually about how much do you earn, or journalists are making a fortune, blah, blah, blah. I use this analogy for them. Technically, these two guys do the same job. They make a living by driving a vehicle, okay? Except one is a Formula One driver champion and earns millions per year. The other one is a truck driver. They both sit behind a wheel for a living, but they don't, the amount of pressure, the advertising revenue, the selection process is very, 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 very different, right? So a TV star, a newscaster that's a leading newscaster in your country that earns hundreds of thousands of euros a year, and good for him for doing so, doesn't mean that the tens of thousands of journalists in that country earn the same amount of money. And then I break it down usually with figures. The average salary in France for a journalist is before tax around 3,000 euros, blah, 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 blah. Transparency, once again, it is very important because it helps pass on values, it helps them to understand our method, and it gives us credit in terms of ability. What we do, we don't do because we couldn't do anything else. I mean, I know some people who work in education system, for instance, well, educators or teachers would have loved to become a journalist. I don't know many journalists who would have loved to become an accountant but couldn't, so they decided to be a journalist. This is something we choose and we should be proud of, and because of what we just saw, all the process, the techniques, the values, we do it right, as good as we can. So how do we link now this transparency credo that I have with trust? This is another example I use with kids. It's up to you. I mean, we're in democracies. We have the power to choose. I'd rather go on a plane with pilots who have qualification, certification, training, methods, a brand I know, than someone who tells me, oh, I've got a plane, I can fly you whenever you want. Up to you. You decide. It's your choice as a citizen. It's your responsibility individually. But as we say, news is good for you. News can be good for a community, for citizenship in general. choose who you want to travel with. It's up to you. But what we're telling you is that out there are people who know what they're doing and they do it right. So this is all very theoretical and it's easy to say. Now, as a clock ticks, I move on to the question of reaching younger audience. And you might have the answer already in your hand. Most media companies, like I said at the beginning, are aware that they need to renew their audience, their target groups. So you have different formats, more and more. Unfortunately, they all look the same. Someone has a good idea, everybody copies. But at the moment, it's all about Instagram stories. In the middle there, so you have the newspaper, the Instagram stories, and the YouTube channel on the right. Promote that. Build around your brand. It's very important because we have credit, we have a specific value we need to carry, and we have content to show for it. Now, how do we organize that? I mean, Nismat has done it very well. You can build specific activities that are tailored around an age group. Okay, that's my experience, and some people in this call today will agree with me that active participation is a key. It can't be like what I'm doing. I'm telling you what the rule is. That doesn't work with younger audience. It has to be back and forth. It has to be an exchange. It has to be prepared with people that work with them. You can't just say, oh, come to my school and can you talk about media for 2 hours or 1 hour? Yeah, great. You might eventually, depending on what time it is regarding to lunch, have 1 or 2 people interested for the whole duration. It doesn't work like that. It has to be something interactive and something that's prepared properly. And once again, don't hesitate to build around your brand, because I'm sure in your media companies, there might be some people who have ideas, who have done some products already that can be used in that instance. Now, the big topic, the thing that's being thrown in our face, I was going to say like feces, but no, but a bit. It's fake news. So yeah, but what about fake news? Fake news everywhere. It's dangerous. So that's a big problem for us, I think, media literacy practitioners. Fake news is not news. I'm sorry, but fake news is not news. We are crass people specialized in news, and we are bombarded like everybody else with content that wears the clothes of news to sell ideas, ideologies, products, whatever. These are not news. It's very different. This is an apple. This is not a fake apple. It's different. It's something else. You can call it a fake apple if you want. It's still a pear. It's not the same thing. It doesn't help you figure out what is news and what is not news. But what's important is that it helps you understand that if you can identify proper news, then you have the power to choose. Okay, you can be tricked. It's true. You can be tricked. So there is a little method that I use and I recommend to people. We journalists, like I've been saying, have values, techniques, etc., etc. And we have an objective, which is bring you some content so that you can make an educated choice and build your own opinion. I'm talking to your reason. I'm not talking to your passion. I'm not talking to you so that you grab a pitchfork and attack a prison or a school or a supermarket. Okay? So sometimes I will write a headline to catch your attention. It's true. And I can use passion to engage you in news. But ask yourself, every time you see something that really, really steals your passion, makes you super happy, super angry, who is talking to you? If they're not talking immediately to your reason, if they're talking to your passion first, be wary. It doesn't mean it's bad, but it could be bad. So use this distinction between reason and passion. In general, news media is about reason, is not about passion. I'll give you a few examples now, very quickly. Gamification seems to be the leading innovative trend in media literacy at the moment. So we have, and I can go further into detail later on. We have developed a program called Actu en débat, which is debating around news. We give a group of young people 2 different news sources on the same topic. and we make sure they engage in debate about are they for, against, why, how, blah, blah, blah. We start with a quiz. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Kahoot. Kahoot is a fantastic tool to create interactive quiz, so the audience can play with their mobile phone. You have a screen, you project question and answers, and people in the audience with a QR code can join into the quiz, and they can participate immediately. So that creates, we start the session with that, creates some dynamism. Then we present the two new sources. For instance, we have one workshop around the war in Ukraine. Can media show everything about when they talk about the war? Do they have to, or can they show everything? So we have a first-hand story, which is a long interview about a French guy who volunteered with the Ukrainians. And I read out loud some extracts from the article. And then the second news source is the most striking pictures of the war in the first year by a French leading weekly magazine. And they both, I mean, so the whole room is as silent as you are when we finish presenting the sources, because it's quite shocking. And then we get a debate, and we have cards for, against, and we give them some arguments. So we have system with points if we want to make it more playful or not, depending on the age. But that's so debating is a form of engaging them with news. And because the question they start to ask, because all the reflections they make and what feeds the debate is all about editorial choices. And then they realize how important it is to have clear editorial choices, either to talk about something or not to talk about something, etc., etc., etc. So quiz and debate go hand in hand. Quiz itself is quite good. Serious game is something I'm working on at the moment with some European partners in another called Creative Europe as well, News Arcade. It's basically a CMS that enables publishers to turn a news story into an interactive game experience for the reader. It's not finished yet, so I can't show you exactly how it works. But if you're interested, I can invite you to workshops. And escape games, that's a new one. There's a French newspaper, someone I work with, who's created an escape game around news. So they welcome a group of young people to the newspaper, and they play the escape game around news content. So now the last question was about business. Obviously, you know there are public subsidies. How to make money with media literacy? I mean, it depends what you want to do. If you want to turn it into a business and make a profit, think about it twice. If you want to break even and make sure you can do that so that you can carry on developing media activities, then maybe public subsidies, as you know, because you're here, is a way forward. Partnerships is interesting. There's more and more partnerships possible with foundations, with brands. Why not? Could be publishers, it could be education brands. There are more and more players in the field because people understand how important media literacy is. And also training activities is something that I see on the rise. My organization, we're about to embark on a big project for training journalists throughout France with journalism schools. So, because you can be the best journalist, as you know, and be the worst educator possible. It's possible. You can be very good at your job, but not being able to speak to a crowd of young people or younger people easily. So you need to be trained, and there is money in this at the moment. Depending on the country, depending on the public funding you can find around training, or your employers. But training is something I would highly recommend to look into, because it can help develop products and projects. But the key, at the end of the day, is to know exactly what you're talking about. You might have understood now that I insist mostly on the craftsmanship of news people to explain that what we produce as content has value for you, has value for your community, has value for the country. And you can trust us because we have techniques, we have rules, we have accountability, and you have the power to choose to use that. This is the way I explain things in general. That doesn't make it a business. It makes a decent workshop. It doesn't make it business. And that from the last 4 years when I've been doing my job, developing that nonprofit, I would highly recommend to work with all departments possible. Marketing, sales, people have good ideas. They know your product, they know your content. They might have been thinking about something that you had no idea about, and it's been in the pipeline for 6 months, and maybe they have the answer that you don't. Because you can be a very good journalist and not be a very good businessman. It's fine. So talk about what you do with your colleagues in other departments. They might have the solution that you don't, and even outside of your company, public services, etc., etc. People are willing to try new things at the moment around this because everybody understands, finally, not for the good reason, that it's a bit dangerous what's happening around news at the moment. So I'll recap everything, and then we can do questions written in blood. Explain what news is, how we do news, and why we do news. So that's very important. That's the starting point. What is news? How do we do it? Why we do it? Empower the audience, make them realize, because, and there you're fighting against Google, Facebook, Meta, TikTok, etc. Make them realize they still have the choice to decide how they are going to see the world, and not wait for hundreds of videos of little kittens on Instagram to take away their time or their mind power. Be transparent about what we do and how we do it. I can't emphasize enough the power of showing the mistake we've made. I mean, I keep repeating to kids that journalism is not a science. We make mistakes, but we have ways to correct them, as opposed to stuff they can see online and people don't care. Insist on the benefits of news. Why are news important for them, individually, collectively? Interactive format is important. They're so used to being challenged. They are being asked to put thumbs up and subscribe to things all the time. Unfortunately, the intellectual pathway now are triggered in a gamified way that they have to interact. It's good to interact because it challenges you out as well, and share what you're doing with your colleagues and the other departments. We all have a lot of things to learn yet.
I will go about the business, Etienne. So what you mentioned is it's a way you can develop and increase what you say, like trust, but you're not going to make a lot of money out of it.
No, but what you do, what you're going to create, the ideas you have, the publisher can use them to as an offer in the premium package, for instance. Okay, so you can have a family package, subscription package, and you get a serious game, or you get a newsletter, or the news quiz that you guys building every week, or something like that, which is usually tailored as media literacy activities. It doesn't mean that media literacy is going to help you make money per se, unless you find a partner or someone buys your product immediately. But it's valuable, especially now when we're trying to reach out to new audiences. There is value to it, and it's difficult to turn it into coins, but it has value, and that can be recognized by someone else in your company. Arlene?
Yes, the notion of training journalists to teach, I think, is very cool. And I've seen at least one example where the news organization sold that training to business schools, where they wanted their students who are, and these business schools could afford to pay a premium. They wanted their students to learn about journalistic behaviors, how to write better, how to verify, et cetera, et cetera. So that may be another variation on what you talked about, training journalists to be better educators and make some money in the process.
I saw your question about AI, and I will touch on it in a minute because I knew it was coming. You're absolutely right, Arlene. Everybody, I'm sure 2 months ago, everybody saw the picture of Kate Middleton that was taken away. I mean, and people talked about it. Is she well? Is she unwell? Is she ill? Is she gone? I mean, news is still a social magnet. It's something that unites people. When I talk about training, it's not just about journalists. It's true. It can be in companies. It can be in business schools, like you said. I mean, there's no limitation to it. And it's I think it's a trait of journalists. We don't realize what we have in our hands.
Yeah.
We don't realize what we are trained for and what we do very well, which is take a topic, look at it from different angles, and make it accessible to other people. Remember what happened during the COVID, during the first months of the vaccine. People literally were so polarized. It was either black or white. You were for or against vaccine. Imagine now running a company when everybody's divided black and white constantly about topics. So news can be something where actually people can reunite and share things. I don't need to agree, but we can build workshops. There's a debate one, for instance, that can work with adults very well. And your question, sorry, was about AI. Does it make it more difficult? Is that what it was? Hold on, I'm just gonna.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think AI makes everything easier and more difficult. The way, and it's funny because before that I was preparing a roundtable I'm doing with people, a lawyer and a scientist around AI and disinformation. Disinformation is a problem because, okay, it takes a clothing of news to sell propaganda or other things that are not profitable intellectually and not good for democracy. AI is going to accelerate, multiply this problem, it's true. Therefore, we need to make sure people know how to find a decent news source so that they don't fall in the traps set by AI. I don't know if it's making it more difficult, it's going to make me more common, more often, but it makes it easier as well because AI will help us feed through or thieve through bad and good content. I'm sure there are people working today using AI to filter bad content and content that's being tampered with and content that is genuine. Is that clear? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Honestly, I'm really, maybe I'm naive. And I mean, you might have different opinions. I'd be happy to hear you about this. I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about that. I think people who want to be informed and understand why information is important to them will find good information. I think the habits will change, but the idea behind news and the access to news will remain. And it's true, it's going to make things more complicated, but also we'll have tools to make it easier for us.
But there is also the risk that with SGE, for instance, from Google, that people just are looking for news and they find it and they find a summary of news thanks to SGE, and they don't go back and they don't go to the links. They don't click on links to the common to our brands, to the trusted brands, while they are trusted, which is really important. And it's also the moment to emphasize that the trusted brands are more important indeed in a world with AI news and fake news and so on. But another risk is indeed, I come back to the first sentence of my intervention, is SGE. It's not anymore a search engine, but a response engine.
Yeah. If we can explain, I mean, like I explained before, we have to explain to people what the tools are and the way they work. Unfortunately, we're bound to now and say, well, AI is in a closed environment. You're not getting the whole thing. You're not getting the source. It's rebuilt from content that was drawn from the primary source, etc., etc., and show the limitation. We have to be very technical sometimes. We have to show the limitations of the system, and also we have to believe that the organizations that are negotiating now with Google and everybody else on AI will do what they have to do to defend the business. But I don't know. I don't think people are naive. I don't think people are too naive and think, but you're right. We have to insist on what they have to lose, in a way. I use an analogy with teenagers, talking about TikTok, for instance, and the mass entertainment that they see constantly compared to a small amount of news. And sometimes, oh yeah, but we have some stuff, and I thought it was news, it was not news, and disappointing. Or that TV channel is very opinionated, it's not news, it's all propaganda. I said, well, has anybody ever had a kebab or a hamburger for lunch in their life? So obviously everybody raised their hand. Have you ever had a tummy ache afterward? Have you ever been sick after eating something that was not good in a fast food? Yes. Did you go back and have the same meal the day after, and the day after, and the day after? Did you do that? No. Why? Because it's bad for me. If you know what the diet you can have for your body, you realize. Now we're talking about the diet of the brain. How do you feed your brain? If you think it's not good for you, don't do it. If you know it's not good for you, don't do it at all. Right. It's. I think the main issue we're facing is that they have abdicated the power of choice. And we have the opportunity to show why they can choose us, media companies, people who work in news, as opposed to not choose anything and be bombarded with advertising content. That's the only thing we can do, unfortunately. But that's what we have to do. Let's want to have entertainment. Yeah, everybody wants to have entertainment. How could you show a passion for news? Well, you can show how good it is for the rest of the world. And it's true. We that's a problem and the solution as well. Everybody does the same thing. I don't know if it's if you know the brand in your country. There was something called Loop Insider in the US and Brut in France. It was short format video with massive text on it. It's been copied and multiplied everywhere in the world, and that's the format that's leading now on TikTok and Instagram when it comes to news content. When there's a good idea, everybody does it when it works, because a good idea works, and that the beauty with social media is that you have metrics immediately. How many views? How many likes? So for bosses, it does translate in ad revenue. So that's an incentive for them to do it. So do we have to do it? I don't know. I don't know, Sophie, if we have to do it. Unfortunately, we are bound to do it at the moment if we want to exist in the space. But you can always do something different. I mean, This Matin did a fantastic 2050, what their region is going to be like in 2050. That's a different form of news format. L'Express, the weekly newspaper, is did a fantastic series on YouTube with reporting on news in 10 years' time. It's complete news fiction, but it makes one think about what news is about, etc. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. We can multiply the formats, but the resources are not infinite. So someone is going to make the decision for you. Don't worry.
Do you have an idea, Etienne, of how media literacy, or say education aux médias, is developed in other countries? So maybe especially in, I don't know, Greece or Portugal. Is it something that media develop or not? Do you have a knowledge about it? Or maybe we could ask our friends from Greece if it's something growing.
Aline can tell us, because Aline knows as well a bit.
Oh, okay.
Well, I know in Portugal, there's some folks from Portugal on this, are there not? I know you do a lot of things with the journalists. And France, and you two won't say this, but I'll say this, that France is a leader in doing good things around education for media. For years, they've had a fantastic world-class press week in which everybody's involved. And it's one of the few places in the world, I think, where you can talk to a teenager and ask them about press freedom in a march when journalists were killed, and they will give you a very articulate response about why they are there and why that's important. And I think that's thanks to the media literacy that's been done in France. So I just wanted to get that out there. I don't know about Greece at all. What's going on in Greece? Maybe some of you can tell us, but Portugal has very active program.
because maybe the journalists can talk about this to see if there are specific education training on new technologies and media literacy. I think as a universities, we try to take a European project on media literacy in order to give them, to collect all the media together and give the specific actions in the framework of project. But according to my knowledge, I don't think there are specific actions that come from the government in order to put some emphasis on media training.
Philippe's highlighting the fact there are some stuff in Belgium is true. There is at least in French-speaking Belgium, there's a good tradition of media literacy as well. We are publishing on June 11th a op-ed in as many newspapers as possible and magazines as possible to ask for coordinated policy around media literacy in France that doesn't transform it into screen education, but stays focused on news and content and the benefit of news. That's why I was highlighting be careful with fake news, because media literacy everywhere, I think in Europe, has been focused in the last few years about the risks, the dangers. If you teach people, oh, careful with this, be careful with this is how you raise a child the same way. Don't touch it, it's hot, don't touch it, it's hot, it's dangerous, you're going to cut yourself. It's not very positive, it's not very encouraging. They're going to step away from the kitchen. Kitchen is dangerous. Same goes with news. We in general have been building media literacy activities around fake news and disinformation and the risks and blah, 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 blah. And we've taken our eyes off the benefits and the positive aspects of news for every individual, for communities, and for democracy in general. And this should be at the heart of any public legislation or regulation around media literacy. The Council of Europe, I don't know if any of you have ever worked with them, seems to be interested in developing more and more projects. But it's true, Harleen is absolutely right. We're blessed in France with a long tradition that started with the French national and regional newspapers of 40 years of media literacy activities. And we're trying to keep that alive.
But I would agree with you that there's a huge problem with media literacy focusing on not trusting anything. I was at a conference in Brussels, and over again, they were talking about these standards for media literacy in Europe, and they did not include anything about talking about the role of journalism, anything about the threats journalists faced. So we've created a set of suggestions, or a part of their suggestions, to just add that to media literacy standards, to say, well, you know, we really ought to point this out. And I know Etienne and APM signed on for that, and we don't know yet the success of that, but it's a huge problem. When you look at media literacy standards, look at them in your country, see if they say anything about journalism is necessary in a democracy, and there are journalists who are thrown in jail in some countries for what they do or killed. And I will guarantee you it's probably not there.
I think there are two reasons why this is happening. First, news media has not been good at all in explaining what they do and how they do it. For a long time, it's in the newspaper because it's important, because I wrote it. That was pretty much the caricature of the attitude. And so we didn't have to explain anything. But we forgot. And so it's a given. Yeah, news is important. But now it's not a given anymore. And so we're at risk around this. And so that's our fault. We should have been more proactive in explaining what news is and what it's good for. So that's what we need to do. And on the other hand, I think it's easier as a teacher, I'm not saying teacher as in an educational setting, but someone with authority dealing with a group, and they have to address this topic. It's much easier to say, oh, we're going to talk about the risk of this. And if I only talk about holiday and travel to kids about, oh, the danger of flying a plane, and not give them the general statistics about how many planes fly every day and how many accidents we have per mile and traveler, they will have a completely weird caricatural idea of reality. And not because they want to focus on dangers, because they don't know better. And we have to help educators know better about what we do and why we do it.
And I love what you say about journalists having been assuming that everybody would come. And also it goes to the other extreme. Once some journalists start to talk about what they do, they take this preachy mode. It's very pompous. It's freedom of expression. You must believe in freedom of expression, as opposed to telling people what they do that is actually useful in their lives.
And it's interesting to show. That's why I'm insisting about transparency, talking about transparency. Let's share our mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
We published this and it was wrong. We got it wrong because we all jumped to the same conclusion because we're trying to compete in the buzz world about that story about the kid in Canada that found a Aztec ruin using Google Images, and everybody published it, and then we all backtracked because we realized it was bollocks. It was not true. Excuse my French. But this is fine. We're not science. We make mistakes and we correct them. That's what actually differentiates us from other medium. So yeah, transparency, big time, and not being preachy. You're absolutely right, Arlene. Did I bore the pants off everybody already?
But what some people are doing.
People are very silent. Just one thing. I was very interested what you said on the format you use, and you mentioned gamification. In fact, I'm very surprised that we, as a news media, all of us, we have been not that much exploring gamification formats with serious news.
It takes time.
Yeah, I know, it's very...
And it's beneath us, in a way. News is serious, like Arlene said about the pontificating. News is serious, news is important. Do I need to turn it into a game to grab people's attention? It's not a natural way of the newsroom. But now, if you see how games, how big they are, Wordle, all the games, every leading media, which is actually not just a news media now, but a platform, like the New York Times. I'm not talking about Meta and all that. They all have daily games because this is how they grab people and how they subscribe. Apple News in the US, you now have a free game. They announced it last week. If you subscribe to Apple News in the US, you get your daily game as well. So maybe it's a trend. Maybe it will go away in 2 years.
And the media literacy games have been kind of negative. They've been how you can create some fake news and see how it travels. It's like, wait a minute.
And it's difficult. It's not easy, Sophie. We're working on it, and it's hard to navigate between the objective of educating people towards what media is about and using it as a publisher to grab the attention of a new audience. It's not exactly the same target. It's not exactly the same technique, really, and the same objective. And they both pull in different directions. So far, our product is nearly ready. Basically, you take any stories that you produced as a news media and you put it in a CMS, and people have to choose this part of the paragraph, that quote, to keep it, not to keep it. And they're given an objective to start with. We want an opinionated piece or a critical piece, or we want a general knowledge piece on why is Europe taking all its dams down, for instance. Okay, and so we give them all the content, and people, when they will play, them being the publishers turn it into a game experience, and the player will choose different parts and come up with their own version of the article. So that they get to experience editorial choices.
And I have hopes for that because I've looked at news games for learning about news for years and years, and they tend to be boring or hard or both.
But
Yes,
I
as
don't
you
know.
said-
No, go on, Sophie. Sorry.
No, as you said, trouble is it acts. You have to have a lot of resources that usually you don't have as a news media, especially if you're a legacy news media.
Well, we've done it because we have like Europe Creative Funding. Huh? It's not. We tried before without it. It doesn't happen.
But
The one thing I wanted to say is, when you've done media literacy project with kids, you see how, and it's participative, like create a magazine, a report on a story, interview someone, you see how happy they are to participate and create stuff. So gamification has this as a backbone, that you participate, you engage, and it's a good way to pass content and knowledge.
I agree. Doing journalism is one of the most powerful things we can offer young people, because it's fun and it teaches you you can't avoid learning about verification, et cetera, in that context. And then getting published after that is like, woo, it's still a big deal.
How do we turn them into future subscribers? You won't turn them into future subscribers. What you can do, though, is make sure the people paying for the subscription for the family benefit from the product you've done for the kids. It's not, I mean, I've never seen 12-year-olds punch each other to be the first one to buy a newspaper. I've yet to see that. Tell me when it happens, because that's dead. And the average readership of a printed newspaper in France is 67, 45 when you combine online and print paper, which means we have a lot of 30-year-olds subscribing online. 30-year-olds are young parents. If you cater for the kids, if you engage them also as young adults around media literacy for them, like special newsletter, meet the chief, interview the chief editor for your subscribers, then the products you've developed for the kids will make sense, and they will keep them in that community. Look at the way we all roped in by subscription on Netflix and shit like that. We have to do the same. Excuse my French again. We have to do the same. The age of worshipping one media because it's your local or regional media or is a leading media in the country are dead, finished. It doesn't mean they're bad, but that's how the market is changing. So we have to change with the market. It's not dirty.